understand this, I'm going to say.
Excuse me. Welcome to the meeting, members of staff, councillors, members of the public and the media. Could you please remain outstanding for the council prayer? Almighty God, grant to us all needed guidance, wisdom and judgment as we face the tasks before us, and enable us now and always worthily to discharge the sacred trust placed by the people in our hands. Amen.
Amen.
Apologies.
Councillor Rabbit, Your Worship.
Thank you.
And I'll read an apology for leaving after leave at 3:45, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Your Worship, on the off chance we're still going at 5:15, I would have to slip away. Thank you.
Okay. Any more? I'll move the apologies be received and accepted.
Seconded, Your Worship.
Thank you. Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
It's carried. Declarations of interest. Been no changes there, Claire?
None that I'm aware of, Your Worship.
Thank you. Public forum. Anyone speaking on that?
None that I'm being requested.
Okay. Move it that the minutes of the meeting of council held on the 26th of October 2021 be confirmed.
I'd happily move those, Your Worship.
Second those, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion, questions? Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against carried.
Your Worship, I'm sorry, but it seems that there is a major late item today. I'm not sure what it is. I thought it was a
It's
minor.
not on my schedule.
There's a
There is a
paper.
late item regional submissions on the emissions reduction plan discussion document. Can I just check with the officers as to whether any decision is required today?
No decision.
In which case it'll be a minor late item. So we would ask that the council consider whether it wishes to receive the minor late item. The reason for it being late is a matter of timing in terms of when we received it and when we have to be in a position to give feedback.
I'm happy to move that we receive that. Happy to second that.
I think it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion, questions? Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against carried.
Thank you.
And we dealt with that. To be moved that the minutes of the Infrastructural Services Committee held on the 2nd of November 2021 be received,
I'll move that they be received, Your Worship.
and recommendation to council on the parking control
Yes, and the parking control bylaw.
bylaw. Discussion, questions?
Thank you.
Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
It's carried. Minutes of the extraordinary meeting of Risk and Assurance Committee held on the 3rd of November.
Happy to move those, Your Worship.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion, questions? Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against carried. The minutes of the Performance Policy and Partnerships Committee.
Your Worship, I think there's an emergency meeting of
Oh, sorry, there is.
council held on the 5th of November.
Move that the minutes of the emergency meeting of council held on the 5th of November 2021.
I'll move that, Your Worship. I'll second it, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion, questions? Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye. It's carried. The minutes of the Performance Policy and Partnerships Committee held on the 9th of November.
Happy to move those, your worship.
2021. Thank you.
Second those, your worship. Thank you.
Seconded.
And can I just ask whether the mover and seconder intended the recommendation to council?
Indeed. Thank you.
So we haven't put that one.
You can put that now, your worship.
Performance report for the 3 months to the 30th of September.
It's been moved and seconded by Councillor Ludlow and Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, Councillor Ludlow and Lewis. Councillor Lewis
Thank you, your worship.
seconding that. Moving it. I'll put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Carried. And recommend to council that it approve the following budget forecast changes. 3.476 billion budgeted for the demolition of the Esk Street West buildings is no longer required with the sale of those properties. The funding for the demolition is transferred to capital contingency.
Yes, your worship, that was part of the original motion.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that?
It's been seconded, your worship.
Oh, it is. Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Move to the minutes of the extraordinary meeting of the Risk and Assurance Committee.
I'll move those minutes.
Seconded, your worship.
Held on the 15th of November 2021. You received?
Your worship, I'm stopping and hesitating because I am aware that the Risk and Assurance Committee discussed the matter of the transition plan for external appointees, and there is a separate agenda item on this same matter which I believe is to be withdrawn. So there's been a double up and you don't need the separate item headed transition plan for elected members. On that basis, I was just looking and wondering whether Mrs. Parfitt had anything she wanted to add to this report.
For the record, councillors, the report that Claire is talking about, item 11, should in fact be withdrawn because it's covered in the risk and assurance minutes. The resolutions are exactly the same, and just for clarity, there were minor changes in the report to council. There's a spelling error on page 36. I probably don't need to go into that in detail. The words that make it very clear that the EAs, I'm just going to read this, it's just gone from my screen. I can put it up. Bear with me. The words, the EA's supporting, mentoring and process focused role will continue through to at least March 22 review, but no later than the 30th of June. That was simply for clarity. And the final change was that Appendix E, the chair's terms of reference, were updated to reflect what is in fact in the report. These were very minor changes, and as Claire says, it is appropriate to withdraw this report because it's a double up.
Thank you. So that's being moved as an amendment?
No, your worship, I wanted councillors to be aware of this in case they wanted to have a discussion on the item and they felt that the next report would be coming forward. It won't be coming forward. We'll withdraw that. And this, I don't think it's been moved yet. Right, okay, so it's been moved and seconded and it's got the recommendations to council in it.
It's these recommendations here, is it?
No, Your Worship, next page over. No. It's here, the minutes of the extraordinary, it's this series of recommendations here.
And got it marked as 10.
I'm sorry, councillors, Worship has there's some sensitivities in the agenda, and so this has been taken out by mistake. So this is the matter on the transition plan for external appointees. You'll see it all on the screen, Your Worship.
Ah, yes.
Thank you. So it's been moved and seconded.
So,
I think Councillor Pottinger has a question.
Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, can I just get some clarity on point 3 of item 11? The establishment of a new group supporting the Mayor. I wasn't at the risk and assurance meeting. I'm just wondering what the context of this is.
I've got that as item 4.
Yeah. So in the report on 10 is actually item 4, confirms the support for the supporting Mayor's group. So this came from, can I speak, Your Worship?
Sorry, do you want to deal with the minutes of risk and assurance first, or do you think that's...
Could do, yes.
We've got confused by putting the same item on in a number of different places, and I apologise, it's not been helpful.
Do the minutes first.
Do the minutes so that His Worship.
So just receiving the minutes.
So I had it was a question from Councillor Pottinger wanting to know about item 10.4.
Your Worship, I think the intention of council is if we could just vote on accepting the minutes of the extraordinary risk, then we can pick up that question in the next item.
You agree with that?
I think it would be helpful, Your Worship, yes. If you can receive the minutes and the recommendations, I think that would be helpful.
They've been moved and seconded, Your Worship, so you just need to put them.
Thank you for that. I'll put that to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against carried.
So, Your Worship, Mr Grant will now speak to item 10.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just picking up, this is a report from PGG, which then went to the risk and assurance, which sets out a range of recommendations, which you'll see in the full extent in terms of the R&A report. I just note that in terms of these recommendations, the project is still well on budget in both the last financial year and the proposed financial year as we're going into, and the recommendations are predominantly around the transition plan for the EAs. I'd also note that the Department of Internal Affairs and the commentary to the project governance group said that they felt there had been a maturing in terms of the work done by both council and staff, and that the transition was probably an appropriate time. The recommendations take effect on the 1st of December. They include that the Deputy Mayor take over the role as Chair of PGG, and I would step down as one of the EAs. The 2 deputies on the Chairs group would take on the role of joint chairs of the Chairs group. That was predominantly expressed as a preference by the PGG on the basis of sharing the workload amongst those on the Chairs group, and that also the EAs would back off in terms of their involvement, and only one of us would attend both committees and council each week as appropriate. And as the question raised by Councillor Pottinger, there was also a recommendation to continue support for the Mayor, which was part of the CE and Mayor's working group. So on the basis that the rest of the working groups were to be collapsed, and that there was a discussion at PGG on the view that there may be a good argument to continue some support for the Mayor, around the issue of both well-being and also for matters that may come to the attention of the council by the mayor in regard to services. So that is for an open discussion for the council to decide, but they were the basis of the recommendations in the report.
Thank you. Councillor Pottinger.
I'm just asking the question, what does supporting the mayor mean, or what roles are we talking about? And I'm just I'd just like a bit more detail if possible.
Look, I think I could reflect, Your Worship, that the discussion in PGG was just the general principle of support for the mayor, and with the involvement of an informal group of councillors. If there was the need to have a more defined role, then that should be something the council should ask for the PGG to look at.
The reason I ask this is that if we leave it too open, then it is open to misinterpretation. I think we need to be more prescriptive, if possible, if such a group was to exist.
Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I'm about to be chair of the PGG group. So I guess I've got some issues with recommendation 4 in tab 10, and also the last statement in the summary that says that this supporting the mayor's group should go forward. I've been involved with the group from day one, the supporting the mayor's group. It was actually, as rightly reflected, supporting the mayor and chief executive, and we've made the gains that we want with the chief executive support, and so that's now refocused on the mayor. I've asked the mayor today whether he wants that group to continue, and he said he did, but I will be seeking some advice from him today about what he sees are the outcomes that that group would want to achieve. And that's what Councillor Pottinger is raising as well, because I don't want us to have a group for the sake of having a group. It's got to have some tangible outcomes, and given that the mayor has pushed back on the Thompson report and most of the outcomes contained within it, I want to make sure that we're getting something out of this, because this will involve councillors putting in time. The other issue is that we've had, I guess, a range of issues that have been thrown up by the mayor, certainly in the media recently, in relation to clerical support, PA support, cell phones, bottled water and other things. And while there are physical things, there is some need potentially to support the mayor with his well-being as well, so he feels okay about coming into the business. And so that wording was slightly changed at the last PUG meeting to reflect that. But my understanding from the mayor is he's uncomfortable with the words well-being as well. So would seek some clarification on that, because going forward we need to know where we stand.
Any further questions or issues, councillors, and I'll answer them in. Oh, sorry, Councillor Clark.
Yeah, just for your benefit, Your Worship, I would like you to respond to tell us, one, that you'd confirm that you'd like this group to continue, and also to tell elected members who are going to be elected to this group, because we are looking for some new bodies on the committee, on the group, what outcomes or what you see as being the benefit for you or for the organisation if we keep this group going, because my initial view is I think we should lapse the group now. So if you could help us with that, that would be great.
Yes, any further issues you wish to raise? It's a very difficult job to to organise and to spell out to people what it's about. I think the pressure's on, of course, because when I first became mayor, we just had a Gestetner, and now we've got computers, and it can be a challenge for some of the senior citizens, and it can also be a liberating force. But in this case, I think we get guidance on the role of the mayor through publications that come out, and they state quite categorically that a mayor is not doing a 9-to-5 job. I think a challenging role. It would be very hard to find a description that would suit all 78 mayors and chairs in this country. But it's also, it gives an opportunity to take aboard some real success stories and some gigantic disasters. And it's the success stories for me are, I worked out that housing was the most serious challenge for the city. And so I set about buying a house at Bluff and buying another one for the Dan Davin house, and spent a lot of time and energy repairing them and contributing to draw attention to the problems we faced in that area. I also think the next most important job for me anyway was promoting the city. We were the fastest declining city in New Zealand or Australia, and I just felt we needed to change our image. So I got involved in movie making with the world's fastest Indian, and SIT, who had a big housing for apartments for students, and a zero fee scheme, of course, that was also successful. And I don't expect councillors will agree. They see often the most important thing is attending meetings, and they judge you by that activity. But I'd like to get involved, and so I think this committee should continue, but I'd like to see it changed. At the moment, it's linked to a 12-hour base, and I've done 12 hours just in the last 2 days. And so I think the committee would agree that well, I don't know if that answers your question.
Sorry, Your Worship, it was more like a beehive press release, but I think what I'm asking for is what are the roles of the councillors, because there will be councillors volunteering for this committee, and sort of the details I was after. Is it attending Zoom meetings on your behalf? Is it attending functions? Is it things like that, more specific, that you don't have the time for or whatever? That's what I'm trying to get an answer for. What aspects of support, you know, those things. I'm just, because if, you know, as Councillor Clark said, there will be obviously councillors wanting to enlist for this job, and I imagine they would like to know what they're up for.
Short answer is I don't know. Although meetings are set out quite clearly, usually, it's things just come out of nowhere, and I'm just come from shooting an advert for the House Board to get people vaccinating, and those are the sort of things that you don't prepare for or you don't know about until they actually happen. So I can understand your frustration.
So given that answer, I would actually like to move that item be withdrawn from that list. The support group not be established. Sorry, the answer does not give me confidence that it's worthwhile setting up.
Can they put a resolution at this stage?
I think councillor Pottinger is moving an amendment that that item be deleted, that paragraph 4 be deleted would be the easiest way for that to be handled procedurally.
Seconded.
It's moved and seconded that item 4 be deleted.
It's an amendment.
And, sorry,
It equates to an amendment.
an amendment. Now, of course, after that talk, trying to explain what we're doing or what a mayor does, I think the only real answer to that is looking at election results. That's the ultimate test of whether you've been a successful mayor or not quite such a successful mayor. Councillor Ludlow.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'm speaking against the amendment and think that putting the facility to have the committee to provide support in whatever form is needed would be a good proactive step. However, I do take on board the comments from both Councillor Pottinger and Councillor Clark that some detail around it would be useful. I don't know that we're going to come up with those today, but maybe that's something that can be thrashed out over the next couple of weeks before the committee starts. I mean, they've got to have a purpose, and I think it's a good opportunity to define down what that purpose is and what is needed that fits within the realms of what we're able to do. If His Worship is spending all day in meetings, that doesn't actually require office support. But if for all the other things that go on as a part of the role, making sure that we've got adequate support in place is one of your concerns, then we probably need to thrash that out a little further. So personally, I'd like to see it stay in.
Discussion, questions? Councillor Clark.
So just going back onto some of the issues that I initially spoke to, I just want to quickly run through so the public are aware of what we're doing and why we're doing it. We set out after the Thompson report to put in place some PA or clerical support, whatever you want to call it. It was deemed at the time that 12 hours a week would be okay, and the Chief Executive had a caveat to that allowed for additional hours to be put in on a needed basis. That hasn't occurred, so that would signal to me that the Mayor has adequate hours attached, and while His Worship refers to doing 12 hours on the last 2 days, his PA doesn't need to attend to those. PA predominantly manages the office and potentially could do some research on his behalf if he was going to a meeting. So the issues that we've dealt with initially with the group are the PA's role, which I think is resolved. The cell phone, which has been dragged up recently, has been offered on more than one occasion and has been declined by the Mayor and his partner. IT training's been offered up on at least 3 occasions and accepted once and declined on the other 2 occasions. And we've had allegations of bullying which have been resolved at the Mayor's suggestion that we take it no further. He was offered to have an independent investigation of that. So the physical things around the job that have been raised as an organisation, we haven't responded to that. And not true, we've worked our way through each and every one of those issues, including the stored items that have been across several venues. And we're just about to the end of that as well. So I support the fact that I don't see any benefit for this group going forward. The Mayor told me he's resistant to the well-being angle that I initially was in support of, because I thought we might have been able to help him on the well-being area, but he's not interested in it. He's purely focused on the other issues. So just to reinforce it, I support the amendment.
Further discussion, questions? Councillor Soper.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to speak on this one because I don't support the amendment. I think I'm going to speak on this one because I don't support the amendment. I think that there is some worth in leaving this recommendation in, and as Councillor Ludlow suggested, having some more conversation to flesh out the requirement outside this meeting. We are not going to progress fleshing out the material today. I'm looking at page 34 of the agenda, where bullet point 2 says the group should comprise an informal team of up to 5 councillors who would look for opportunities to engage with the Mayor consistent with the group's purpose and report to the PGG. That seems to me like it's worth having more conversation about how that's fleshed out, so I would be reluctant to just see the initiative removed in the spirit of the Thompson report. I'd like to see it stay in place and the conversation about exactly how that's going to be put in place develop some more. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Any further discussion? Put it to the vote. Show of hands, please. All in favour of the amendment, say aye. Against? Thank you.
In which case you go back to the substantive motion, Your Worship, which is all 4 paragraphs, and you may like to see if there's any questions or whether you wish to just put that in.
I think we've had enough discussion. Oh,
No, sorry, on page 34, as Councillor Soper quite rightly recommends, there is a suggestion that the group that goes forward, which we've now approved, has up to 5 councillors, and it would be helpful from a PGG perspective if we could identify whether there are people within our elected members group who would like to be on that group. I'm currently on it, but I will withdraw because my relationship with the Mayor's strained, and so I think it would be Lindsay Abbott already chairs that group, so there's one, but I just want to know from my colleagues whether there are other people that would like to be on that group.
any volunteers? Oh, very good.
There you go. I'm just getting.
Your Worship, might I just say I quite like the word on page 34, the first paragraph. Engage the Mayor is an informal team of up to 5 councillors, so it's not a strict documented program. The informal one it leaves it a little bit open. That could be offering you a ride if you're at a meeting and your transport's held up. It could be perhaps escorting you to the rugby or something of that nature. I presume. I'm not too sure exactly what the informal thing involves, but I would be quite happy to put my hand up as I just indicated.
Thank you. I'll put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Where are we up to? Transition plan?
No, that's the item that's been withdrawn, Your Worship. So the proposed replacement of media protocols.
Thank you. It's another tricky subject with dealing with the media. And it's had a rocky road as a result.
So Ms. Knight has come to speak to the report.
Okay. Welcome to the meeting.
Thank you, Your Worship.
And just pull that close enough, Lisa, that Jane can hear you, Jane and Lindsay.
As you know, the media protocols were introduced in February of this year in response to Richard Thompson's recommendations in his initial report last year. They were intended as a support and a guide for councillors in their interactions with media. I think it's fair to say the intention and the perception did not align. And given that interpretation, Richard Thompson made some further recommendations in his 6-month review to reconsider the media protocols. The report and the recommendations that you have in front of you here today are a result of the working group having considered again the intent of the media protocols and how we would suggest moving forward. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, my question is just regarding, I guess, the charter, which involves the media protocols and how it all combines with our existing code of conduct, which has its own section on media protocols and values. Are they going to be incorporated into one document on our governance section of our website, or rather than have two sets of road rules? Are we going to, I mean, you don't want to be dancing between 70k and 80k, or
Mr. Chair, I might ask Councillor Pottinger if he'd like me to answer that question, because Ms Knight is the comms manager, not the governance manager,
right?
and would be unfamiliar with that document in the first instance. The governance statement, or the governance statement and suite of documents, is in response to the legislative requirements. The charter was developed afterwards and to date has not been included or appended to that suite of documents, so it sits outside of it. That's something, whether you wish to include that in the governance statement after the next triennium, would be an opportunity for the incoming council.
The reason I'm very cautious about this is that in the introduction to the Code of Conduct, it has a set of 8 values. Now, these values, even though they sort of align with the Charter, don't exactly align with the Charter. And the same with the media protocols, even though they sort of align, they don't exactly align. So you could choose, depending on what you were doing, to say, well, I'm just obeying the Code of Conduct, or yeah, I'm just hoping that we can get some cohesion.
Mr. Chair, or Your Worship, more correctly, I apologise. Your Worship, the intention of this is to draw to councillors' attention, in whatever language works for them, the need to have a code of behaviour that everyone is comfortable with. The Charter was developed after the Thompson Review and developed with the input of everyone sitting at the table. And that is the primary document, I think, in terms of the first port of call. And I also believe that Mr. Thompson has identified that a well-functioning council sorts out its differences between itself rather than filing code of conduct complaints. So the issues that you're raising, Councillor Pottinger, I think on a strict interpretation, you're absolutely correct. I think on a give a little interpretation, we would say on the 23rd of November, let's work with those 2 guiding documents as a way to make sure that our behaviour fits within one of those at the very least. And you draw a really good point about the attention that we should give to marrying the values and the behaviours in the next governance statement.
Right, so that won't, currently that charter, when you go to the website, doesn't sit there. How does someone find it?
So, Your Worship, if we don't have it on the website already, we will make sure it is on the website.
Under governance.
And we will put it under governance, and we will put it in the same section. We might put it more than once, but it won't be embedded in the statement, as that needs to come back to council. And in its most simplistic form, I'd suggest to you that you've got better ways to spend your time and the office's time than reviewing that document at this stage of the triennium.
Thank you. Any further discussion, questions? Councillor Edmondson.
Thanks. As the chair of the working group for media protocols, just like to add that what we found when we went back and reflected on these media protocols after this 6-monthly review from Richard Thompson was actually that we almost jumped the gun, I guess, in terms of developing media protocols to solve the problem of how we managed councillor behaviour and elected member behaviour. And what we realised is that the charter, which we had been working on at the time, time but wasn't completed until April actually was the thing that should provide the guidance for us on how to deal with behaviour in the first instance, and where that had done its work and more action was necessary, then we would step to the code of conduct to finish the job, so to speak. So that is the reason why we have come forward with these recommendations, which does include that the Charter supersedes the media protocols, and as a result we should revoke the media protocols. And the reality is, I guess, the media protocols also only sort of touched on things that were already mentioned in the code of conduct anyway, by way of reminder to councillors. But as has been mentioned by the officer, you know, that was not the perception or the feeling that the community got from them. So I'm quite happy to move all of those recommendations.
I'm quite happy to second those recommendations, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded. Oh, Councillor Ludlow.
No, Your Worship, it's been said.
Further discussion on media protocols? Councillor Keir.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've always been in favour of free speech. We've got to let the citizens know what we're thinking about, and we should bring it out into the open, even if it's criticising fellow councillors or even you, Your Worship. I've been a bit baffled by this. A meeting I missed for various reasons a few weeks ago, Councillor Pottinger made comment about the Labor government and Minister Mahuta regarding the three waters, and I felt it was a straightforward and honest comment, and good on him for that. But then Councillor Soper bailed him up and accused him of grandstanding. Look, I don't know if there's any grandstanding in that. He spoke his open mind, and as I said, good on him for that. So free speech, yeah, bring it on. Look, it's going to be a very interesting 10.5 months, and I'll be speaking my mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Ludlow.
Your Worship, I'll roll out my favourite saying. Freedom of speech exists, but it is not freedom from consequence.
Good.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay. Anything else councillors wish to raise besides? Oh, Councillor Clark.
Yes, Your Worship. Reading through the media protocols, it seems to me that we have a set of standards through several documents on what our behaviour should be around the media. One of the key things that's on page 49 is the need to discuss the issues and to debate issues, but not to use that venue or that opportunity to criticise unfairly another person. So you don't play the player, you play the ball, as it were. And so, casting my mind back in the last 6 months, I don't know how this will resolve behaviour that's not adhering to that playing the ball issue. It's well documented that I've had some public criticism from the Mayor and some name calling from the Mayor in the media, and I've elected to do nothing about it because I just think the public will judge him for that. But it seems to me under this protocol now that where we have behaviour that we don't think it's right, that behaviour should initially go to the Chairs group, a group that the Mayor says is an inappropriate group and is splitting our council in half. And then as a second option, if the Chairs can't resolve it, it goes to a code of conduct. Now, I don't want us to have a whole series of code of conduct complaints that they achieve nothing. They're like wet bus tickets. They cost us a lot of money. And they ruin our reputation in the community, but there must be some better mechanism for us to hold each other accountable for our behaviour than just going to the Chairs group, and I'm still lost on what that should be.
Thank you. Further questions, discussion? Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against. Carried. Move on to the proposed revision of the Built Heritage Fund. Welcome to the meeting.
Kia ora koutou. There were actions identified within the city centre heritage strategy, and one of them was to create incentives to support heritage resources. While the initial focus of those incentives was towards the 25 buildings and streetscapes identified within the strategy, the City Centre Heritage Steering Group, looking at it 2 years in, sees an opportunity to broaden those incentives to a larger audience. As such, they propose to revise this year's Built Heritage Fund and dedicate a portion of the funding towards owners of all recognized heritage buildings located within the City Centre Heritage area, specifically for facade enhancement works. It means that all the owners that were originally included within the strategy, they can apply for a wider variety of works. So this is solely for the facade enhancement portion. The revision stems from the level of redevelopment currently taking place in our city centre, which we're all well aware of, as well as the low funding uplift from owners within the first 2 funding rounds, and that's mainly due to several external factors. The revision seeks to further support heritage building owners and to encourage enhancement of our city streetscapes. The report recommends that Council receives the report and endorses the proposal to revise the Built Heritage Fund. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions, councillors? Councillor Clark.
Yes, we've had a discussion already about this, but it seems to me that we're cherry picking a little bit about the buildings that we want to invest some upgrade in based on available funding. And it seems sad to me that we're putting, I don't know, this council's putting probably somewhere north of $60 million into a city block project and streetscape. In fact, maybe even more than that. And yet we're not prepared to put money into upgrading the facades of some of the streets that are adjoining that. So, and I appreciate that we're doing it from the perspective of the Heritage Fund, but it's a bit of a sad indictment that there'll be other buildings that will sit there in what appears to be a pretty horrible state. So I know you've identified about 24 buildings, but there's about 40, I think, from my memory, or 42 that need some work. So I guess the challenge for us is just to try and find out how we can help the owners of the other buildings who aren't heritage, but they're still very old buildings, so that our inner city starts to look much sharper than it is at the moment. And I know we've had previous debate about that, and we got roadblocks from saying that we couldn't put ratepayers' money into a private building, but it's more than that. It's actually the face of our new city, which we're trying to create. So just wanted to acknowledge that what the work you're doing here is great, but it's a challenge for us is to try and do further work, because it's no good just doing heritage buildings. If every third building gets an upgrade and the others beside them look pretty ugly, it's like having a neighbour's property right next to your very expensive home that's got long grass. It just doesn't do what we're trying to do. So just a challenge in that area.
Councillor Crackett.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do get Councillor Clark's point, and that it really quite a lot of the city, and if you do a walk around and you have a look above the facades, quite a lot of them are in a state of neglect, or so not so much neglect, but in some cases quite severe disrepair. We do have environment applications that actually allow us to control those sorts of things, and request that the building owners do keep the upkeep in that, but it only goes so far. I think with this being able to pivot and repurpose this funding for this purpose, for heritage buildings specifically, actually brings in a level of equality for all building owners. Because I mean, if you've got heritage building, the remedial action is typically a lot more expensive to outlay for special, this special treatment, it's special plaster, it's special heritage items or that you're trying to restore. So this actually does go away to provide a fund so that others, or those in the heritage listing, can afford to upkeep their buildings or afford to bring them back up to standard and more in line with those that own commercial buildings that aren't protected by those heritage restraints do. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Amanda.
Thanks. I'm part of the Heritage Steering Group, and we were really excited when we realised that there was an opportunity here for us to be able to provide some extra support and funding for some wider heritage building owners in our CBD. Unfortunately for us, it is a heritage fund, and so that is why the funding is targeted at heritage buildings, but certainly acknowledge that there are some other buildings that could probably do with a wee bit of support or help as well, and maybe the council can consider that and how we might do that in another way. Would really like to thank Shannon personally for all of the great work she has done with the heritage building owners. She is one of the reasons why the ones who are in the strategy have got a bit of a backload of work because she has helped them to get heritage equip funding. And also to take up the other funding that we have had on offer as a council that they haven't quite been able to use yet. So her, and also to Liz, who I know gives her a lot of help in that area. So I'm quite happy to move those two recommendations. Thanks.
Thank you. It's moved.
Second those, Your Worship, and I'm also a member of the committee and endorse what Councillor Munson has said on this matter. It is a built heritage fund, so council wishes to have a conversation about a fund that is a built fund without the heritage word that would expand the support. That would be a conversation for another day.
Well, Your Worship, I would I'll put my hand down, but I would like to say something. I also will endorse it, and I would make sure people realise it's not a total cost of any renovations. It's an incentive to help the building owners get involved, and they appreciate it very much. And I also endorse the hard work that Shannon and Liz do on this committee. Thank you very much. As I am a member of that committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ludlow.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not a great fan of ratepayer money doing the general maintenance that a building owner is expected to do as part of their investment. I mean, they're happy enough to charge rent for it. Maybe they need to look closely at the rentals that they charge. But I also recognise that in the case of heritage buildings, there's a greater hurdle that those building owners have to overcome financially, and we want to try to encourage the retention of those features in our streetscape. But Councillor Clark makes a good point in that recognition, at least if not subsidising, because I'm not a fan of that, but recognition of the work that some building owners have done that aren't in heritage buildings is a really valuable thing. We used to have an awards function each year where we recognise those building owners within the CBD who had invested in their buildings and upgraded them and presented them with plaques, which I saw proudly displayed in businesses all over town, and they were valued. And I think it's probably worth us looking to perhaps reignite those, you know, for the cost of half a dozen or a dozen plaques and a supper after a presentation. It's a really good investment for what these businesses have put into the building, and hopefully it can be seen as another way of encouraging those who don't have the heritage buildings to take that next step.
Thank you. Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, I really want to carry on strongly with what Councillor Clark said, because it makes total sense in the fact that if you are funding the refurbishment or at least painting, you are in control of the colour scheme, the coordination, to make it look right. If we leave it up to individuals to do whatever they want to, they may want to paint their front purple just to be the standout shop. But at least if we are the funder, we have the ability to be control of what we want it to look like. And I think that's critical. We're spending 22 million on Don and S Street. I really think everything else surrounding it needs to come up to shape. And I think, you know, if you go to places that have been done professionally, the street frontages complement each other, colour schemes do. There's a lot more to it than just plaster and doing things up. We're talking about something that works. So I actually support Councillor Clark's idea, and that council should, with its streetscape focus, look at funding towards supporting other buildings.
Thank you. Councillor Pottinger.
Worship, I think Councillor Pottinger's sentiment is fantastic, but I would just ask Liz perhaps what control we have over the colour schemes. With the heritage buildings, I think we have control, don't we? But the general public buildings, we don't have control.
Yeah, and I think that that's what Councillor Ludlow was alluding, or sorry, Councillor Pottinger was alluding to, that with heritage, there's a approved ICC heritage color palette, but obviously it only extends to heritage buildings. I still have contact with a lot of the non-heritage owners through a lot of our seismic strengthening work as well. And we always say that they're welcome to chat with us, but at the end of the day, it's their building and they can decide to do what they want in terms of colour.
Thanks, Shannon.
Councillor Cricket.
Thank you, Your Worship. Might I suggest that as Chair of Infrastructure that Councillor Pottinger request a paper or investigation on perhaps some sort of support for building owners in the inner city as we roll forward into the next tier of streetscapes.
Have I got a support group?
One, as you will be.
Councillor Skip.
Do you need one?
Thank you, through your worship. I just want to endorse Councillor Clark, Councillor Pottinger, and an excellent idea from Councillor Crackett. I think that's overdue. I think that'd be a really positive sign that we've been sending to the wider community as well. There's many other things that we have invested in, and once again, we've got another opportunity to do so. So we've got one shot at this. So I look forward to seeing a paper with some costings around it.
Councillor Clark.
Yes, just to add to what I said before, I get feedback from landlords that say that over a period of time the city has drifted away from where it currently is the CBD, in particular across to where the warehouse is and other places down there, and so they've lost tenants in that process. So if you go and look at a lot of these buildings that we're talking about, not the heritage ones but the other ones that are in this immediate block that we're trying to enliven, they have ground floor tenants but they have nothing above. And so they don't have a lot of rental power to go doing up buildings, and no incentive to do so. My assessment was, when I initially had a look at the 42 buildings, putting aside a couple of verandahs that need to be done, I thought that the water blasting of those buildings and some initial painting in heritage type colours, which would be great for our CBD, was probably about $600,000 worth of work over a period of a few months in summer. And that sounds an awful lot of ratepayers money, but when you consider our streetscapes is somewhere around $25 million plus for 2.5 streets, it's a small investment to really get this right. So expecting landlords without some help to do it, some of them just won't cope with that, and that will devalue what we're trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more? Councillor Edmondson.
Another suggestion might be inviting ICL to consider contributing to something to do with the buildings that aren't heritage buildings.
I noticed that Scott has already offered to help out in East Street, on the north side of East Street, but our CBD is bigger than that.
Councillor Soper.
Thank you, Your Worship. With the suggestion from Councillor Crackett and the further suggestion from Councillor Munson, it seems to me that we've got some very meaty issues to arrive in a report, and we're probably not going to get a lot further speculating about possible costs or whatever at the table without a report. So perhaps it's a good place at which to draw the conversation to a close and look forward to some report.
All right, since you had your hand up, Councillor Craig.
Thank you. Just to extend on that, Your Worship, I know this council has talked about not only the street frontages, but and Councillor Clark has just referenced it in the fact that there's retail on the bottom quite often, or commercial entity on the bottom for renting, but nothing on the top. And a lot of that is around what the building owner can actually purposefully use the building for. So I wonder if there would be appetite for this council to extend that report and potentially have a look at what constraints they have on whether or not what they can use those buildings for, whether or not it's residential living in a city, residential living, because we've talked about that as something that could be remedial for getting those buildings in the inner city up and running and humming and being used. So I know we've talked a lot about what levers we can pull to change that, to get a lot more foot traffic in the city, and this report could be wider than that and treat that issue as well, or at least investigate it.
Thank you. We're just receiving that, weren't we?
Your Worship, the recommendations are in front of you, that you receive it and that you endorse the change to the Built Heritage Fund.
Thank you. Council received a report of 2022 meeting schedule.
No, sorry, Your Worship. We're at the revision to the...
The council receives the report titled Proposed Revision of the 2021-2022 Build Heritage Fund. That council endorses the proposed revision to the 2021-2022 Build Heritage Fund. Put it to the vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Against, carried.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we need to formalise the request for that?
Your Worship, Councillor Crackett's asking about a report for a further item. That report would be a matter for a committee in the first instance, as it would, this has come forward to this to council on the basis that it's a change to the terms of reference for the City Centre Steering Group, but to consider the matter further would be a committee item. I think if the chair of PPP was to acknowledge that that's where it would sit, and to take infrastructure perhaps. I heard it as being a matter relating to funding for buildings owned by third parties.
And purpose.
And I hear that as being a matter of partnership rather than a matter of council-owned
It is
infrastructure.
PPP, painting, plaster.
Perhaps.
Correct.
Well, infrastructure deals with those other three PPs, the three Ps that wastewater is to be utilised for.
Well, it looks like PPP has got the job.
Good luck.
I don't care how it gets here. Just
With,
As long as we get the report.
That's not me, it's my committee. So
with the manager of governance and legal sitting at the table, he will ensure that it is entered to the tracking report and that that comes forward.
Thank you.
I suggest it's a popular pleasing puzzle proving positively perplexing.
Well,
for sure.
had enough
You
peas.
may. You may.
Enough peas for today.
Your Worship, would you like to bring this rabble back to order?
Meeting schedules.
Your Worship, two very simple recommendations. This is just something we do every year. Happy to move them both.
Happy to second that, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded. Discussion, questions, put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried.
Well spoken, Michael.
Code of practice for land development and the subdivision infrastructure bylaw. Moved.
Thank you, Your Worship. This report's for information around a consultation that will be undertaken for a practice note for the Code of Practice for Land Development and Subdivision Infrastructure Bylaw. Happy to take any questions.
Thank
Happy to move the two recommendations, Your Worship.
Happy to second those, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded. That's 1 and 2.
Infrastructure.
Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried.
I think Councillor Cottinger.
Look, I've just got one, just connections to 3 water reticulation networks. Now, when we do a bylaw, obviously we're in charge at the moment, I think, maybe. But come the Three Waters being taken away from us, obviously, would this affect our own bylaw?
There's a lot of water to go under the bridge before you can determine that finally. Must be the last council meeting of the year.
No.
So obviously,
I'm happy to make a comment on the Three Waters integration if you'd like, just quickly.
thank you.
I think just further to the Chief Executive's comments, there's a lot to work through in terms of the role that Council will continue to have in terms of development and the role that new water entities would potentially have in terms of becoming the asset controller for Three Waters. So we're definitely going to have to work through how that interaction happens and how we get approval for them as to how to connect to services, etc. moving forward.
I mean, just looking at the worst case scenario, you may have to be communicating with Christchurch, for example.
Absolutely.
Or Wellington. Or Switzerland.
Councillor Clark.
Yes, Rhiannon. At the meeting we went to yesterday, you heard some discussion about land use or land development in relation to going upwards as opposed to cities expanding outwards. So is this code of practice going to look to that? We've had a submitter previously come to council about the ability to go upwards as opposed to go outwards. There are benefits for infrastructure, certainly Three Waters if you do that. And we currently have some restrictions around that. So will this open that up for some discussion?
This code of practice doesn't specifically relate to that matter, councillor, and the practice note is quite specific relating to those two issues of climate change standards and the subdivision timing of infrastructure going in for Three Waters. It is very specific on this matter, but next year when there's a more detailed discussion around the bylaw, that matter may come up at that point.
Because I noticed that in the background here, you mentioned the New Zealand Standard Land Development Code, I guess, or standard. So that will come at a later stage.
This code of practice already exists and is based on that standard and notes where the differences are. This report today deals purely with the practice note around those 2 points.
Okay. Thank you.
Your Worship, that item has been moved and seconded and the motion has been put already, hasn't it? Yes. And so we're waiting for you to put this motion in front of us.
Okay. Move on now then to the code of practice for land. Oh, that's just what we've done.
You've done that, Your Worship.
Oh, sorry. It's been moved and seconded. I'll now put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against carried. Temporary alcohol ban. Christmas at the races.
Happy to move that, Your Worship.
I'll second that.
Your Worship, it's the same as last year.
Questions?
Just
Councillor Pottinger.
Look, just making sure that the under offences and penalties that is not a typo. That fine is 20,000. It just seems weird. Or $250. Do you get a choice? I mean, if you're the offender, I mean, it just sounds massively huge. The 20,000 for the offender, and or $250, depending on which part of the act it's deemed. Is it? It just seems just a huge bloody gap. Is that correct? That 20,000
and or
right.
$20,250, worst case scenario.
Mr. Morris is just coming to.
Here we go. I knew you'd come.
No, it is correct. So under the Local Government Act, when you breach a bylaw, the fine is up to $20,000, but that's when you are prosecuted in court. For bylaw alcohol bans, and including temporary bans, you can have an infringement fine, which is the $250 that the police can issue, which is what they are most likely going to be issuing should there be a breach. So it is an either or, but the police have the discretion to decide which way they wish to proceed, and I would say 99.9 times out of 10 it's the infringement fine.
But don't try them on it. No.
Councillor Kears.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Just a clarification. On the date of Christmas at the races on Saturday, the 11th of December, I understand within the boundary of the liquor ban area in Racecourse Road, there is a private birthday party starting at 6 p.m. for an elderly citizen. And I just hope common sense prevails, because there will be a lot of elderly people arriving for that party, probably 5 p.m. onwards, and they will have food and beverage with them. I just hope that the authorities, the security guards and police are made aware of this and let them in.
I think Mr. Morris is coming to the table too.
I'll stay here. Yes, so short answer, Councillor Kate, is yes, there's always room to allow for such things, because it recognises that people who live along there need to have their lives and not have their lives temporarily affected by a ban of alcohol. The importance of the alcohol ban, however, is that it actually does protect those residents by and large, because in times before we put the temporary ban in place, there would be a lot of alcohol consumed along the street, and sort of a preloading issue, which we all know does not tend to end well in terms of behaviour. That's certainly the evidence that's come through. So that's why. But yes, absolutely, always room for common sense to prevail if there is a private function going on in a residence along that part of the road.
It would be similar to the liquor ban in the inner city, where someone was taking a bottle of wine to a BYO. They would be allowed to do that and would not be stopped, or well, they may be stopped, no question, but they probably wouldn't be prosecuted.
No, they'll be stopped and questioned and then be sent on their way.
Yep.
Second,
very
they
much.
pop the top though.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So it's been moved and seconded.
Moved and seconded.
Yes, it has been, Your Worship.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against carried. Report for the Mayor. We had a rather robust session with the mayors and chairs, and doesn't appear that
Your Worship, there is a mayoral report on the agenda, and I'm just circulating the letter from the Mayor of Invercargill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it's not old tea, but some
Is that the logo?
Not from the it's the we never get back to
Tomorrow, Gavin.
You've been out there, haven't you? Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm excited about this.
You get to know a bit about the culture.
Have you got a copy?
That's good.
I've been clear that they were well worthwhile being funded by
So switchy. Switchy.
Chief Busey from achieved a lot when they were there.
Very nice.
So do you
We got it. Thank you, councillors. My agenda's still in the office, so we'll start with the Mayor of Invercargill. Just I guess expressing his support for the quandary we're going through, and I think that this mayor was, his grandfather was the mayor when I was first elected, and
His father, Your Worship.
what,
His father.
and father. So quite a personal relationship for those who were fortunate enough to travel before COVID-19. But just like to move that the report be received.
Seconded, Your Worship.
And we'll be responding to this letter. It's moved and seconded. Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against carried.
And Your Worship, there's this late item of the submissions to the emissions reduction plan.
Submission on the emissions reduction plan. Who's speaking to that?
The suitor.
Welcome.
Kia ora again. So, as the Chief Executive mentioned, the reason that this is a late item for you today is that it was discussed yesterday at the regional hui that many of you did attend. This is a joint submission that we have supported and worked with Environment Southland on. So it's being provided here for your information. It will be submitted by the due date, which is tomorrow. It does take into account the views of Councillor Soper and Councillor Munson, who are the leads for climate change, and it has had the input of a number of officers from across council. So I think the consensus yesterday was that it was a good opportunity to put forward a regional view, and this submission reflects the discussion that was held across the four councils.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Crackett.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think that this is an excellent submission to it, and it's great to see that we're working in conjunction with Environment Southland. But I would like to talk about the public transport sides of things. At Chair's meeting last week, I spoke a little bit about the Free Fares campaign. So it is a campaign to provide free fares for tertiary students, those with community card holders, and oh goodness, can't remember off the top of my head, under 25s. There's lots of people in our city that, or lots of young people in our city that still find it difficult to access our public transport. This report here does speak about the fact that a reduction in cost is a positive, and that's really the only way that we will get the uptake required for meeting any real meaningful public transport outcomes. It also talks about the cost of it, like cost of electrification, and garnering a bit of support from central government. But the Free Fares campaign actually drives for, obviously, free fares paid for by central government, and gives it a bit of a kickstart on that. Now, there's some other councils across the country that have already committed to supporting this, and as part of their ERP response and ERP submission. I would be really interested to know if it's something that this council would consider supporting, or, of course, because we actually only have the contract for public transport in Invercargill, or we've been delegated authority to provide public transport for Invercargill. We don't have the actual mandate, which sits with Environment Southland, that if we encourage Environment Southland to take a good look at it and support it regionally rather than just this council. I think it would be a great thing for us to get behind. It's asking central government to provide free fares for those disadvantaged in our community. You can see, or we have statistics on the fact that, you know, youth in this city living in lower socioeconomic areas find it difficult to get into town or to move around the city in comparison to those that aren't. So that's my pitch, and I would really hope that my colleagues would support me on it and recommend that we recommend quickly, I suppose, if this is have to go forward tomorrow to Environment Southland, that they consider supporting the Free Fares campaign.
Thank you. Discussion, questions, Councillor Clark.
Yes, I was at the meeting yesterday, so just a couple of things around the transport and the carbon farming as well. Some degree of non-connectedness between us and the other councils, because we have different environments. So moving around this city is different than moving between community hubs out in the rural areas. So there were different needs being reflected there. The lack of e-charging for e-vehicles was raised. The recent development of e-bikes as opposed to e-cars or just bikes was thrown up, and whether we have the right infrastructure in place to allow e-bikes which can travel up to 30 kilometres an hour around an inner city area like ours is a question for us to address at some later stage. So they were issues that were raised, and certainly from the rural colleagues, the issue of carbon farming on what they see as food producing land was also raised as well. I think they referred to categories 4 and 6 agricultural sector land, and the benefits of carbon was quite high for some landowners to convert, but the flip side is you can't eat trees, and so quite a wide bit of discussion from the other councils, especially Southern District, around that carbon farming issue. But good paper going forward anyway.
Your Worship, I wonder if we could perhaps ask the officer to explain the reasoning for the comments in the submission.
Yes, so within the submission there is reference to the Free Fare campaign that Councillor Cricket refers to, certainly saying that the councils are supportive of the goals of improving affordability. On the advice of the roading manager, who obviously is responsible for public transport, is the reasoning for the wording within the submission being the way that it is, that we propose that the way to achieve modal shift is by a lower rate of fares for everyone rather than purely focusing on free fares for those groups. So it's certainly a good topic for discussion with Council today, but the reasoning for that is that to achieve modal shift requires getting large numbers of people out of cars and onto public transport, and a significant number of those groups are people who are working, who are not necessarily students, and they may have a wide range of income levels. So given that the focus of this emissions reduction plan is modal shift, and certainly equity within that wider context, that this would be why from an officer level the recommendation is certainly that there needs to be greater affordability, but this perhaps is an option to consider.
Councillor Cricket.
Thank you, Worship. Absolutely understand that and concur. There's no reason in my mind why the two things can't happen synonymously. If the government was to consider free fares as a good start or reduced fares as a good start for tertiary, sorry, I can confirm this now, tertiary students, community services card holders and under 25s, I think that would be a good start. The secondary option would be that Waka Kotahi could fund 50% of the fares. Minister Wood is on record as saying local government should have skin in the game, which makes that 50% fare subsidy more likely. And I understand that you know, not explicitly saying the Free Fares campaign or a 50% subsidy is what we're asking for, and that the wording is a bit softer, that, you know, improving affordability. But I think having some suggestions in there of tangible things like the 50% subsidy or the Free Fares campaign would be a good steering point or a good platform to benchmark off.
Thank you. Councillor Ludlow, are you?
Your Worship, I wonder whether Ms Suter is aware of the exact wording that Councillor Crackett would like to see in the submission. There will be a challenge in terms of that submission being, that alteration being accepted by ES and Southland as well, but do we have clarity over the exact wording?
Would be useful to get clarity on what exactly the difference would be. That would be useful.
Can I just, the last sentence in that paragraph says we propose the best way to get modal shift would be a flat rate fare of $1 a ride.
Flat rate fares such as $1 a ride, or waka kotahi 50% off fares, or free subsidy or free fares for those tertiary students, community card services, or under 25s.
So, Your Worship, that may be worthy of more discussion at this table, because that is not the officer's advice in terms of the outcomes for emissions reduction. And there's two things at play here. There's the emissions reduction plan, which 3 councils have endeavoured to work together on, and there's a desire to support the Aotearoa Collective for Public Transport Equity is the reference here, and I'm not sure whether that's exactly the right name. And the officer's advice, as Rhiannon explained before, was that that won't make the contribution that we are looking for in terms of emissions reduction. So I just want to bring councillors' attention to that before they start seeking changes to a submission that's been worked on across the board.
Councillor Soper.
Thank you, Your Worship. As one of the councillors who worked on this paper, I'm very keen that we see those two things as separate, bearing in mind that this submission is going away tomorrow, so it has to be away tomorrow, and that I have strong doubts that our partners in putting the submission together would have the time to make that wording change. I've got no objection to separately supporting what Councillor Crackett is talking about. I'm just not sure that the place to put the extra wording is in this document, particularly considering the short time frame to get quite that large an extension to the wording when it's not directly dealing with the emissions issue that the submission is about. So I'm keen to support Councillor Crackett's suggestion, but not necessarily as a change to this particular submission.
Councillor Crackett.
Thank you, Worship. With that, I can see the reasoning behind it. This may not be the world's most appropriate place for it, but I would like to pick up the topic, because I think it really does treat not only, like Rhiannon has said, a modal shift, but there's a social element to it as well, in connectivity for public transport. So perhaps the better place for that is picking it up with the Infrastructure Committee. I did really just want to highlight that campaign is current. We are asking or lobbying central government to provide lower fees or subsidies. As you'll note in the ERP, the public transport runs at a significant loss. We need help, basically. So anything that improves those connectivity for communities and, brings the bar down so people can actually get back to socialising would be excellent. I'll find another way to pick it up. Thank you for entertaining my wants, Your Worship.
All right. Yeah. Councillor Clark.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship.
My advocacy.
I support Alex's views. I guess I have to reflect that we got this paper yesterday and it has to end tomorrow, and you've already seen the debate we've had already. And I think that's a bit of an irony that we are making a submission through to central government. We shouldn't lose the opportunity, and I don't see why, as a city, we can't put an amendment or an attachment to this document, which doesn't require us to negotiate with the others. It just declares that we have some additional information that we'd like to attach. I think we should still attempt to do that. don't need to go back and renegotiate with the other two councils or three councils, but we should just still signal it, because if we don't, the opportunity might be lost. And I think the issues that Alex has raised are good issues that we should have to the fore with the minister or the ministry.
Thank you. Councillor Ludlow.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd support that approach, because I think the issues that Councillor Crackett raised are peculiar to Invercargill City. So they're not, you know, there's not a bus system in Gore or Riverton or anywhere else. So, or Bluff.
Yep.
Used to be a great one. I always sat at the front. So I think an additional brief submission or note with an Invercargill perspective would be a good option.
Who would you have in mind for drawing up this proposal?
Rhiannon.
PPP support group.
Your Worship, there is an issue that we're at 4:30 and there is an all-day commitment tomorrow. I think Councillor Crackett's point is one that isn't part of the emissions reduction plan for Invercargill. That's what Mr. Pearson was saying. Support for the Aotearoa Collective may be better addressed elsewhere, but it's been referenced in here in a small way.
Councillor Soka.
Your Worship, I just wanted to make the point that the submission is to the emissions reduction plan. A suggestion of putting in that particular issue in an expanded form from Invercargill City Council is not appropriately part of a response to the emissions reduction plan. It is an appropriate response to make elsewhere, and I would suggest something that will certainly be taken further by local government New Zealand, or that we may ourselves as a council want to discuss taking further to local government New Zealand's policy, etc. But my concern with asking our staff to take the time to write another paper at very short notice, even as an attachment, is that this is a submission on the emissions reduction plan, and we don't want to add an extra page that is not entirely relevant to what the submission is actually about.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have listened, of course, and heard, and that makes absolute logical sense if we are to put something together to make, you know, to advocate for the advocacy was best spent in the right place. So I will turn my mind on how to do that and bring something back.
Thank you. Further discussion, questions, put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
It's carried.
Did we have a mover for that item, a mover and a seconder? I don't.
I'll move it, and I'll second it.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry.
Good point.
I think that's the end of the public agenda.
Could we deal with it, if you like? Is there any urgent business? Right, I'll move that the public be excluded from the following parts of proceedings of this meeting, with the exception of external appointees, Mr. Jeff Grant, Mr. Lindsay McKenzie, for the reasons stated in the agenda.
I'll move that way, Your Worship.
Second, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded. Discussion, questions, put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
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 It's carried.